All right, get ready to take a trip back in time with me because today we're diving into some seriously old school laws.
Oh, yeah.
It's the kind that'll make you wonder, wait, they actually had rules about that back then.
I love it.
We're talking about Deuteronomy 22, a whole chapter in the Bible packed with rules and regs for the ancient Israelites.
Fascinating stuff.
It is. And, some of these laws might seem totally bizarre to us now,
Yeah,
living in the 21st century and all,
totally.
but that's exactly what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's like a window into the values and concerns of a society thousands of years old.
Absolutely. And you might be surprised to find that in many ways, they weren't so different from us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, let's talk about lost and found ancient Israelite style.
Okay.
We've got lost and found boxes, apps to track our phones, all that.
Right.
Well, back then they had a whole system for dealing with lost stuff,
Uh-huh.
but it was way more community driven than what we're used to.
Much more, I'd say.
So picture this, you're strolling through ancient Israel and you stumble upon your neighbor's lost donkey.
Oh.
Now you can't just ignore it.
Oh, no.
Deuteronomy 22 lays down the law. You're expected to take that donkey and care for it until the owner shows up.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, it was like a legal obligation to look out for each other.
It speaks volumes about the importance of community back then.
That's in it, like a built-in safety net for everyone.
Definitely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They had rules about clothing, too.
Oh, I got here.
Specifically, a law against mixing certain fabrics. Wool and linen. Couldn't do it.
Wool and linen. What was the thinking there?
I don't know about you, but I'm not losing sleep over a linen-wool blend in my wardrobe.
Right.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, on the surface, it does seem a bit random.
It does.
Like an ancient fashion faux pas.
Right.
But dig a little deeper and it connects to this idea of purity, which was a big deal in many cultures back then.
Purity.
Yeah. Mixing things that were supposed to be separate, even in clothing, was seen as messing with that concept of purity.
So it wasn't really about the clothes themselves.
No, not really.
It was about something deeper.
Exactly. It's about boundaries category.
It's not true.
What's considered appropriate and what's not.
It makes you wonder, do we have any modern-day versions of that purity concept? Even if it's not about what we wear.
Oh, that's a great question.
What boundaries do we hold sacred today?
Well, it might not be as literal as separating fabrics,
True.
but think about things like ethical boundaries in business
Okay.
or the idea of purity when it comes to information or data.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
We're still grappling with these ideas of what should be kept separate, what lines we shouldn't cross.
That's a really interesting parallel.
Isn't it?
So we've talked about lost and found ancient fashion rules, but now let's move on to something a bit more relatable. Rooftop safety.
Rooftop safety.
You heard that right. Believe it or not, they were already thinking about building codes back then.
No way.
Deuteronomy 22 actually requires a parapet, which is basically a low wall around the edge of any flat roof.
Huh.
It's like they were way ahead of their time with workplace safety regulations.
It might seem surprising, but even back then they recognized the importance of preventing accidents.
It makes you appreciate the long history behind those ideas.
Absolutely.
So we've seen how they valued community, had their fashion quirks, and even cared about building safety. But what about the relationship with nature? That's where things get really fascinating.
I'm all ears. It's funny when you think about ancient laws, right? We picture things like an eye for an eye, kind of brutal stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But Deuteronomy 22, it's got this other side to it, too.
No.
This surprising concern for the environment, how people were supposed to treat nature.
Really? It's not exactly what you'd expect from an ancient legal text.
I know, right? But there it is, like proto-environmentalism hiding in plain sight.
So give me an example. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, there's this one law about bird nests that always stands out to me.
The bird nest law. Remind me how that one goes.
Okay, so you're allowed to take eggs or young birds from a nest. Makes sense, right? People needed food.
Yeah, that part I get.
But UT, and this is the key part, you have UVE to let the mother bird go free.
Interesting. So it's like they were trying to find a balance
Yeah.
between using resources and making sure there were still birds around.
Exactly. It's almost like an early version of sustainability.
Yeah.
Take what you need, but don't wipe out the whole population.
Huh. It makes you think about modern conservation efforts. Things like fishing quotas, hunting seasons. We're still wrestling with that same balance, aren't we?
All the time. It's this constant tension between using what we need and making sure there's enough for the future.
And it's fascinating to think that even thousands of years ago, They were already thinking about these things.
It really is. It shows a level of awareness that we don't always give them credit for.
So we've got community fashion rules, building safety, early sustainability. What else is packed into this chapter?
Well, Deuteronomy 22 also gets into some pretty heavy stuff.
Oh,
Morality, justice, especially when it comes to sex and marriage.
okay, yeah, those are always tricky topics.
No kidding. And we have to be careful here, right? Recognizing that what flew back then might not fly so much today.
Of course, times change. Values change.
Big time. So we can't judge them by our modern standards. But we can try to understand what these laws tell us about their worldview.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
So what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, there's this law dealing with accusations of infidelity. Like if a husband accused his wife of not being a virgin before they got married.
Oh, I'm guessing this doesn't end well.
It was a big deal back then. And
Yeah.
there were these really strict ways of trying to prove whether the woman was a virgin or not.
Wow, that's intense. Talk about a different time and place.
It really is. And yeah, it makes you realize how much emphasis they put on female chastity. Something we definitely see differently now.
For sure. It's a good reminder of how far we've come, but it also makes you think about the bigger picture, right?
Totally. Like,
Like-
what were they really trying to get at with these laws?
Exactly. Even if the methods seem harsh to us now, was there some kind of core principle behind them?
I think so. Like, maybe a concern for truth, fairness.
Trying to create a system of accountability, even if it was based on ideas that we don't agree with anymore.
Right. And it's interesting to think about how our ideas of justice and fairness have evolved over time. What's changed? What's stayed the same?
That's a whole other deep dive right there.
It is. But it's these kinds of questions that make exploring these ancient texts so fascinating, that make you think, challenge your assumptions.
So from lost sheep to rooftop safety to some pretty intense social rules, Deuteronomy 22, it really paints a vivid picture of this ancient society.
It does. And you know what? It's like holding up a mirror in a way. We see the similarities, we see the differences.
And it makes you realize how much we've changed, but
Yeah.
also how some things about being human haven't changed at all.
Exactly. And that's what I love about this stuff. It's not just ancient history. It's about us understanding ourselves, understanding what connects us to people who lived thousands of years ago.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so compelling. It's not just about the past. It's about figuring out what it means to be human in any time or place. You know, it's really incredible when you think about it. These folks living thousands of years ago, they were dealing with so many of the same issues we face today.
I know, right? Justice, sustainability, community. It's all there. It makes you wonder, what can we actually learn from them? From these ancient attempts at creating a good society?
That's the question, isn't it? Because obviously we're not going to start stoning people for wearing mixed fabrics.
Right. Definitely not. But it's not about copying the specific laws. It's about digging deeper.
Finding those underlying principles and
Yeah.
seeing if they still hold up.
Exactly. And one of the biggest takeaways for me is this idea that we're all connected. Like what I do affects you, affects everyone.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They seemed to really get that back then, that our actions have ripple effects, not just on other people, but on the environment too.
Absolutely. It's like they understood this holistic view of things. Taking care of each other, taking care of the planet, it all goes together.
Yeah. And it's a message we could use a little more of these days, don't you think?
Totally. I mean, the world's gotten a lot more complicated since ancient Israel. But that basic idea that we're all in this together, it's timeless.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Deuteronomy 22, I think it's safe to say these ancient laws, they're more than just a history lesson.
Way more.
They give us this framework for thinking about the stuff we're grappling with right now.
A different perspective.
Exactly. And maybe even some inspiration for finding solutions.
You know, laws change, societies evolve, but some things, they just stay the same. That basic human need for security, for fairness, for living in harmony with each other and nature.
It's like those core values. They transcend time and culture.
They really do. And that's something worth remembering, don't you think? No matter what era you're living in.
It is. It's a good reminder that we're all part of this big human story, trying to figure things out, trying to make life a little better. And hey, maybe looking back at how people did it thousands of years ago, maybe that can help us find our way forward.